Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felipe Millon, and I'm excited to have you all here today to share a little bit about CSS, or Common Securitization Solutions. So I'm a senior manager in AWS in our federal financials business, and I have the pleasure of being here with Manoj Shetty, who's the Vice President of Infrastructure and Cloud Operations at CSS, and with Leah Lehman, who is the Senior Vice President of Securitization Operations at CSS. And so Leah represents the business side of CSS, and Manoj represents the technology side of the house. And so what we're going to do today is share the story of CSS and how they were born in the cloud and really what CSS does. So many of you in the room, I know I've seen it and met before you. Some of you are very familiar with CSS, but Common Securitization Solutions, a joint venture between Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that was really born to support homeownership in America. And so with that, I want to invite Leah to come in to share a little bit about the importance of homeownership in America and some of the business reasons of why CSS exists today.
Hello, and I just realized I do not, have the clicker. Now I do. Hello, everybody, and thank you for those who made the trek here in person. I don't know if any of you walked, but I did, and it was a bit of a haul, so we are glad to have all of you in person and for joining us on the video. So again, my name is Leah Lehman. I have been with CSS now for almost 9 years, so I've been there for quite some time. So we'll talk about what is about a decade-long journey that CSS has had with AWS. But I think to really appreciate that journey, it's important to take a step back and really talk about how massive the housing market is in the United States. And by housing market, I mean all of the money tied to mortgages, and that's single-family mortgages supporting homeowners like us, and multifamily mortgages as well. So to start, can I get a show of hands? How many people in the room own at least one mortgage? All right, so look around. That's what, 80, 90% of the room? So think about that applied to the 344 million people in the United States. That is a lot of mortgages. So let me give you some other stats here to really drive this point home. So 43 trillion, 43.9 trillion, that's the total value of the US housing market. So that's all of the money tied up in housing. To give you a scary stat on that, that is about 72% higher than where we were right before the financial crisis of 2008. So let that sink in. 30.9 trillion, go here. That's total value of homeowner equity. To give you some kind of perspective on that, so if that was a country, it would be second only to US GDP. And on the topic of GDP, housing market makes up 15 to 18% of all economic activity in the United States. And last but not least, about 66% of Americans own mortgages. So you get that it's a lot of data. So why does that matter to CSS? Well, CSS manages about 70% of all single-family mortgages that support the housing market. So that's about 30 million loans and about 6 trillion unpaid principal balance flowing through our company and our platform. So that's a little bit of a teaser about what CSS does, but we have this very nifty video that I will play now, and we'll give you, I think, even some more color. There we go.
The American dream is built on homeownership. To make that dream possible, a vital and complex market needs to function smoothly and securely. When a mortgage lender makes a loan to a person or family to buy or refinance their mortgage, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the enterprises, purchase and guarantee that loan, group the loans together in bundles, and through a process called securitization, monetize them in the global capital markets, generating new funds that go back to mortgage lenders to start the process over again. The massive scale of this secondary mortgage market creates challenges, especially given the sheer volume of data being managed, the need for speed and absolute accuracy, and the overall safety and soundness of this key business process. Enter CSS. Our advanced cloud-native platform makes the process of securitization virtually seamless, issuing and administering securities on behalf of the enterprises and bridging the gap between primary and secondary markets. Through a unique blend of people, process, and technology, CSS issues over $400 billion in monthly securitization volumes and today supports over $6 trillion in securitization unpaid principal balance, representing 30 million loans. Our industry-leading platform offers unrivaled business capabilities, accuracy, scale, security, transparency, and speed, while facilitating the transition of residential mortgages into tradable mortgage-backed securities. As a trusted solution supporting 70% of the nation's mortgage market, CSS offers its clients and investors safe and sound security issuance and bond administration, as well as confidence in the structuring of a transaction's tax obligations. This, in turn, plays a critical role in bolstering stability and liquidity in the U.S. housing market, helping make the dream of homeownership a reality.
Okay, so that's CSS. A couple things to point out here before I hand it over to Manoj. So it references here, and Felipe hit on it. So right now, our sole purpose is in support of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and their single-family book of business and their mission. They are both our client and our owner. So we have two clients, Freddie and Fannie, and they own us 50-50, so we're also considered a joint venture. But CSS is a separate entity. We actually separated from Fannie in 2016. So we are our own company, again, JV between Freddie and Fannie. The other thing to note, it says here that we are cloud native. We were actually born in the cloud in 2012, 2013 when we started this journey, which I recognize is more commonplace today, but wasn't back in 2012. And so, as you can imagine, we've learned a lot of lessons over the year, and we're going to share those with you today. So we'll get through this and hope you guys have got some questions. But Manoj, I will hand to you.
Thanks, Leah. So as Leah mentioned, right, like when we started this project about 10 years ago, not a lot of production workloads were in the cloud, right? So when we started this, we had a choice, right? How do we build this platform? Where do we build it? And there were some critical requirements from the business perspective, what needs to be done, and when this needs to be delivered. So we had some stringent timelines, budget requirements, and then how do we meet all of the requirements from our customers as well. So we looked at various options, and at that time, not a lot of production workloads for critical functions were in AWS. So there was a lot of skepticism around that. So we had to convince a lot of folks on when we said that we want to run this in the cloud, because at that time, nobody had the experience of running anything big in the cloud. So we looked at cloud and we looked at on-prem, right? And if we had to build something on-prem just to build the data center and the core infrastructure, it would have taken us years to start something like that. So we made a choice that, okay, we will go with AWS and we will build it in the cloud, and we will use AWS as our cloud partner. And it helped us a lot, right? So some of the things which we had to do was, right, how do we convince everyone? So we had to write down what are the advantages, and then we identified what do we need to do. So typically when we were building and developing, we wanted to do something iterative, right? Test something quickly, find out if it works. If not, then move on. So we started with the cloud approach. I remember like when we ran our first load in the cloud, right? We thought, okay, that machine would be good enough. First time we run, it just ran 1% of our load. Didn't work, right? If we were in a traditional data center, we would have had to order more hardware, get something set up new. It would have wasted days, and then start all over again, right? With cloud, it was very easy. We just switched the machines, rerun it, and it was fine, right? So that was one of the major advantages. And then the other things which we wanted to do specifically was we wanted to make sure our engineers, they focus on critical tasks, right? And not on managing the underlying hardware or anything operational, right? So we wanted to make sure they focus on critical things like security, creating tools for our developers, making sure we have all of the reliability in place, resiliency in place. So that was the core focus. And the final thing was like scaling up and down test environments. So when you are building the platform, you have to test various scenarios. To do all of that again in the data center would have taken us years or months or years. And in this case, we could spin machines as fast as we want, or we can scale it down if it didn't work for us and come up with a different footprint. And the beauty of this was all of this was done using code, right? So if we had to scale up or down, it was very easy. We did not have to add resources or have to add hardware, right? We just needed to identify what we need, and we could spin it up, spin it down, and then go forward from there. So when we started this project, right, going into the cloud, what worked for us? Like at that time, like there were some challenges, and then there were some advantages as well. So working with AWS as a partnership, we were able to influence a lot of their roadmaps. When we started the project, not everything was in the cloud. Not all of the features we see today was in AWS. So we had to go with some native tools at the time. So we used tools like Oracle. Even today we use Oracle, but we used for queuing messaging services, we used TIBCO. SQS SNS was not there at the time. And for all of these solutions, those vendors did not have any cloud presence as well, or their products were not built to run in the cloud. So we had to do a lot of customization, like to run Oracle in the cloud and make sure we get the performance, we had to do a lot of fine-tuning. Like we had to get storage with dedicated IOPS. For TIBCO messaging services, there was nothing in there which would support multi-region or even multi-zone or highly available architecture. So we had to come up with our own configuration and put design and architecture in place which would support that. And some of these vendors took those and made it as their product as well over the long term. But what we could do with AWS was we could work with them and influence their roadmap and see how they could improve their feature set and products to support us. So in the long run, then we were able to switch some of these tools and become cloud native, right? And the beauty of that is if you're cloud native, then you do not have to worry about any operational overhead of those tools, and it works seamlessly across everything, right? And then if it doesn't work, you can go to one person. Otherwise, all of you know, right? Like if a product doesn't work on the cloud or if you're hosting it, they would say it's the way you have configured it. So that was one of the advantage of getting AWS features and rolling it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Leah to talk about like then how did we progress from there?
Yeah. So given that, right, so we just scale timeline here. We were building, 5-6 years to get to go live. We went live in June of 2019 with what is called the Unified Mortgage-Backed Security, UMBS, which is ultimately what CSS was born to do. And we had tremendous success. You know, I think there was a lot of people holding their breath when we went live with UMBS. It was many years in the making, and there was a lot of concern, you know, what is this going to do to the housing market? Remember, CSS is a critical now part of the housing market chain, and if it goes down, the housing market does not operate as it needs to. And it went live without a single market disruption. And in fact, trading of UMBS exceeded $26 trillion within the first 6 months that we went live, which far exceeded expectations of our client and our regulator. So a real success story, all thank you to this movement and this build out in the cloud. And then 9 months later, here we are patting ourselves on the back. And in March 2020, I think you will all remember, the pandemic hit and nothing mattered, right? Every person, every financial institution, every government agency was scrambling to figure out how to stay safe, but also how to keep the economy afloat. That includes the Fed, who in a real emergency action slashed interest rates almost overnight, not really, but pretty close. We saw about a 30%, I think, drop in interest rates in just 6 months. That is unprecedented. They hadn't seen anything like that since the financial crisis of 2008. So what do you think happens, right, when interest rates and mortgage rates drop like that? Well, you might think that people would be running out and buying homes. But you might also remember that in that time, the price of houses also skyrocketed. So even if you wanted to go buy that vacation home or that mansion, right, they were incredibly expensive. So what people did a lot of was they refinanced. So another audience participation here, right, James? How many of you refinanced during 2020 or 2021? Yeah, so probably 60, 70% of you. And you were not alone. Everybody was out there refinancing. 70% of our activity during that time was refinance activity. That was a 40% increase since the start of the pandemic, so a lot of refis. Fun fact here too, about 60% of the loans that we saw coming through our platform during that time had a rate of 4% or less. So those of you who didn't refinance, probably kicking yourselves right about now. I know I was, I certainly didn't get a rate like that. But all that to be said, so huge spikes in volume for us. You see it here on the screen. Our volumes jumped nearly 80% in just 3 months. At the peak, it was more than 150% more than we'd ever even seen or managed on the platform. And that was a little panic-inducing, but we actually improved during that time period. So this chart, a little busy, but what this shows you in this pink line are our service levels jumping up year over year, particularly from 2019 to 20 and 21. So our service levels being the key measurements that our clients use to measure how well we're doing the thing that we set out to do. You can see that, looks orange here, but red line are volumes spiking up. So you can see 20 and 20, they're growing. And this blue line, very interesting, is our AWS costs going down. So while volume is skyrocketing, while service levels are off the chains, we're seeing cost also on the downside. So it was pretty impressive. And I'll tell you, before I hand off to talk a little bit about how we achieve some of that cost reduction, these service levels, they're no walk in the park. I mean, given what we do in terms of stability for the US housing market, CSS is expected to run at near perfection all of the time. We have a 99% system availability. We talked about $6 trillion in UPB, but what that means is we have to create accurate payments for 30 million loans to make sure that all of these investors get paid appropriately. We publish 1,500 disclosure files every month that have to be 100% accurate. In the event of a crisis, we have a 4-hour return to operations, RTO timing, and an expectation of 0 data loss. So we're talking on pretty serious measurements, and every single one of them got better during this time period. So, but the costs, which I think most of you are probably interested in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. One of the things and why I love the CSS story is, I've been with Amazon 8.5 years, and one of the things I personally love about Amazon is our working backwards culture and idea of working with customers. And we saw it during the pandemic, customers who needed to reduce spend, we'd go and we work with customers on how to reduce your spend with AWS. And it's something that seems very counterintuitive. Like AWS, you're a cloud service provider. If we spend more, that's good for you. So why are you trying to encourage us to spend less? But what I really love about Amazon is it's that long-term thinking. We're really in it for the long haul. Andy Jassy, our CEO of all Amazon, has said, many times with these customers, we're trying to build relationships that outlast every single one of us in the room. And really, the way you do that is by focusing on the long term. And so if I help you save costs in the short run, if I optimize and get better over the long run, we will earn more trust. And Amazon, is not a non-for-profit institution, but over the long run, we will optimize for the right thing. And so what I love about the CSS story is that we're able to share the numbers here. The fact that not only was performance improvement, but cost was continuing to drive down. And I think it's just great to actually be able to see the numbers and see that story. Because I can say it as someone who represents AWS and talk to customers and say that all day long, but really, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like I want to see the actual examples of what it is, and here's a fantastic one. So with that, maybe I'll turn it to Manoj to actually share about what we actually did and how we actually reduced cost.
Sure. So when we started building the platform, as I said, right, we had to do a lot of testing, a lot of development, right? We were scaling up environments. So one of the things was the sticker shock at the time, right? Because when you are building, you're not looking at what you're spending. But then we realized that developers could spin what they want, right? And then we had machines, environments running everywhere, no cost governance or anything around like that, right? So when we saw the bill, it was huge. So then we had to put some governance around that, right? What do we do? How do we bring the cost down? While, as Leah mentioned, we wanted to make sure it does not affect our operations. So we had to make sure we run all of the platform with the availability which we had and make sure that we meet the 0 data loss requirement and the 4-hour RTO. So that was quite a bit of undertaking, right? So we looked at certain things, what we could do to optimize the platform. And it was a long journey. This did not happen overnight, right? If you look at it over the period of 8 to 9 years, it went down from 45 million to 12 million. But a lot of optimization we could do. So what did we do? Like we looked at certain products, right? Rather than using vendors and vendor services, we moved into AWS native services. So what it allows us to do is like scale down some of our operational costs with the vendors and use native services. And with AWS, the biggest advantage is you pay for what you use, right? So your licensing cost goes down. So those were some of the enhancements. We optimized Oracle, right? As AWS came out with new machines, we could consolidate some of our Oracle servers to single instances where it was like performance optimized. We did not have to pay separately for storage IOPS. So we could do a lot of those things. And all of these have like ripple effects. Like we were able to move from, initially when we started, there were no containers in AWS. So we were able to move from EC2 instances to containers. Now we use serverless where we need it, not everywhere. But all of this have a ripple effect, right? When you change your architecture, it's not just your production environment, but all of your lower environments as well. So all of that did save us quite a bit of cost. We went into new regions. When we started, AWS did not have an East 2 region. Now we operate in East 1 and East 2. At that time, we had East 1 and West 1, right? So just to move data over region, that was a cost, right? And it did not have the same RPO or RTO as well. So we were able to do a lot of things around that as well, where we were able to move regions, optimize that. That saved us quite a bit as well. So with all of these different initiatives, we were able to bring down the cost. We had to add a lot of governance around, like who can spin up environments, what can we do, right? So now we have scripts in place where at the end of the day, all of the environments go down, right? And then only if somebody needs it, they have to spin it up. We put lease on the environments. That way nobody can spin up whatever they want. It has to have an approval workflow. It goes away when it runs out of the lease. And then we also implemented a chargeback model, right? Now we see a lot of tools in the marketplace where they give you the cost governance structure, but at the time it was not there. So we had to build our own structure around how do we do cost governance, right? Build our own tools, our dashboards. We would budgets in place, cost anomalies in place, and then at the end of the day, we would charge back to individual business owners or individual divisions. That way, everybody had accountability, right? Like they had their own budget, they had to make sure. We would provide them the tools, but they had to make sure they adhere to their budget. So those were some of the things which we did, and then also we did reserved instances, savings plan, and that helped us a lot as well. Like we could make sure like we could optimize our spend using savings plan. Initially, we started off with RI, but then even managing RIs would get difficult. So with savings plan, now we can just buy compute, and then we can optimize it around that. So we just didn't stop at that, right? That was on the cost side, but it was also on how did we improve our platform over the years, right? Again, for us, some of our core requirements are around resiliency and security. So as I said, initially when we started, our RTO used to be around 24 to 48 hours. And now we started, a couple of years ago, we started a project we called as active-active, right? One of the things we wanted to make sure was when we are running the platform, as we are running such a critical infrastructure, we want to make sure it doesn't go down, right? And it doesn't impact the market and the liquidity in the market. So we said, okay, we'll go and run the platform actively in multiple regions so that even if something happens in one region, or if there is a component failure or a service failure, we can withstand that and it's not impacting the platform and the market. So we went with that model where we are able to run our production load actively into 2 regions. So we are using 2 regions simultaneously to run processing. That way we do not have to ever rely on DR, right? If something happens to a primary region or something within our service fails, we can seamlessly go into the other region. And it's seamless transition to the other region. Now as both things are running, like as all of you know, right? Like if something happens in a region and if you have to do a DR, a lot of people are not comfortable doing that because they do not know what runs in the other region, right? You might have some drift since the time you last tested it, so there's no confidence. Now since we run it every day, it is seamless for us, right? At a click of a button, we can just move it to the other region, and everybody has the confidence in that. And some of the other things which we have done is about the innovation framework which we look at, right? We are looking at all of the newer technologies that come in, how we can adopt it to improve our security posture, how can we improve our resiliency posture, right? We want to make sure that security becomes part of our development lifecycle. So we are heavily focused on the DevSecOps mentality, right? We want to push everything to the left. When we are building something, we want to make sure, right, that security is the core aspect of it. It doesn't come later. Initially, when we started, a lot of these controls used to be detective. Now we are moving it to preventative. That way we can ensure, right, that we have the right guardrails in place. And a lot of these things we want to make sure when we build it, like people are not able to do something erroneous, right? So we build it into the policy itself. Like if somebody is spinning up an S3 bucket with a public access, it would immediately get shut down and deleted, right? They won't be able to do that. So things like that we want to incorporate into our development lifecycle itself. That way we can make sure it is highly secure, guarded, and reliable. The other thing which we did was, right, like initially, all of you know, like 10 years ago, to run infrastructure, it was like system admins and operation engineers. Now we want to make sure, right, everybody's a developer. We do not look at infrastructure as operations anymore, right? We look at it as code. Everything is deployed as code. That way you can scale, and then the engineers can focus, the developers can focus on the core task, right? Do value-added work, which can enhance the business and bring more value to the company. So those are some of the things which we are looking at from our journey perspective. I'll hand it over to Leah, and she can talk more about some of our other innovations which we are working on.
Yeah, and I'll talk at them sort of with a business lens, but if I could just jump back to the cost point for a minute and keep me honest on this. But I remember, and it was a different role at the time, but when we were trying to figure out, and we kind of went live, we settled, everybody took a breath, right? How do we start to bring our AWS costs down? I think a couple things were really useful. One, you had a resource there, if I recall correctly, who watched how these environments were being spun up and spun down like a hawk, right? And she really he or she really held people accountable for making sure that if it was going to be up, it was using it, and that it was going to be down, it got spun back down. And I think having somebody play that sort of dedicated role for a period of time until it was muscle memory for people to do these things was really helpful. And one, the change management aspect of this, and two, obviously driving our costs down. I agree with that.
No, that was very accurate, right? And then the other things which we did was, I missed mentioning that, right? Then we looked at for some of our non-critical loads, right? And we could run spot instances, things like that as well to reduce our cost. Because right, the system was architected in a way that even if the server goes away, you can bring it up and run it. So we were able to leverage some of those things because of our design as well.
Yeah. The other one on the cost model that I will tell you, the chargeback model, which is still in place today. And nothing will cause a business line to react and kind of figure out, like seeing a spike in costs for their AWS compute. It happened to us just a couple of months ago. So my team has certain environments that we are responsible for, we pay for, and we saw some kind of jump. And my team was like, oh boy, what's that? And we realized one of the environments didn't get shut down as it was supposed to. But that puts the accountability on everybody, not just the infrastructure team, to have to manage those costs. And I think that was really a helpful way for us to drive costs down too. So, all right, now back to innovation. So a couple things that we've been innovating on from a business perspective, and I'll talk about them in two major themes. One, the concept of enabling knowledge workers. So CSS, just like everybody in this room, right? We have a lot of brilliant minds at the company, and we want to make sure that we are using them to the max and trying to get them out as much as possible of some of the mundane activities. So we do a lot of experimentation around that. And the other one is around what we'll call ecosystem thinking. So it is rare these days that a company has challenges in silos, right? We are all part of larger value chains. So for us to get the most out of our technology solutions, we need to look in front of us and behind us and think about solutions more end-to-end than just the thing that we are trying to solve for ourselves. So we'll hit on that momentarily, but back to the enabling knowledge workers. So a couple examples I'll walk you through. So in our world, anomaly detection is super, super important, right? We do not want any bad data entering our system, entering our house, right? Because for a couple of reasons. One, once it gets into our system, fixing it is a real nightmare. And two, right, it can cause a lot of disruption if things go out the door incorrectly. So a lot of time and effort is put up front to make sure that bad data is not coming in. We do that, or historically have done that, with data rules, right? As a lot of, I think we have something like 1,300 data rules, that some of them somewhat antiquated at this point. But the problem with these data rules is they are complex and timely to change, right? They require a developer to do it. They require an entire release and testing with the platform. It can take somewhere like 3 to 4 months sometimes if we want to change the parameters on these data rules. So we asked ourselves, well, let me give you an example, right, just so you understand. So let's say there's a data rule that looks for loan interest rates between 2% and 5%. And anytime a loan comes through that is outside of those parameters, it kicks back an exception to our clients. So fine, all well and good, until interest rates go skyrocketing again, and now 10% is okay. Well, you haven't switched those parameters on that data rule. Any loan that comes in above 6% is going to fire back a false exception. And you can imagine the noise that creates for our clients, and obviously we don't want that. So there are situations where we need to be more dynamic in changing these rules, and we just don't have those capabilities. So we asked ourselves, what can we do to shorten the time period allow us to update those rules, and gravy, right, how could we enable the business users to do it so we weren't so reliant on our developers and our engineers to have to make those. They can do the really technical stuff, and the business can sort of do the day-to-day of these rule changes. So we cobbled together a couple of different AWS solutions. We used, and I know it's maybe not the newest technology, but one of their workflow tools that allowed us to do a bit of a plug and play on how the data would come in that has rules right already baked into that workflow tool. And then we put a UI on top of it, a UI that actually was business friendly so that my team could actually get in there and update the parameters of this workflow tool. And it took the time down from 3 to 4 months to update these rules down to like 3 to 4 minutes. So we saw a tremendous improvement there. The other one I'll talk you through is around securitization as a service. So just like AWS offers a wide variety of services to clients and all kinds of different issues they're trying to solve, we asked ourselves, well, why can't we offer securitization services to a wide variety of products for our clients? Why can't we do issuance and settlement for more product types? So the challenge is, the product type that we support today, single-family business, tends to be more uniform. And the system was designed that data comes in structured, it comes in cleansed, it comes in this exact same standard format, which is fine for this book of business. But there is no other product that our clients manage that aligns to that would allow for that kind of uniformity, right? So it's not realistic to think that they're going to be able to send us data through in that same structured way that we get it with single-family data. So we asked ourselves, how can we create a solution that allows some agility or nimbleness and to allow different kinds of data in while still having the same safety and secureness that we enjoy today on the platform? So again, we used a few various AWS products. We used AWS TextRact, which, if you've not used it, allows for a lot of different formats to come in the house and then standardizes them. And then for us, we send that off to Intex for calculation purposes. We coupled that with Lambda to do our processing, wrapped it up in Amplify, and had a really beautiful product that allowed us to handle some of these more bespoke deals. And icing on the cake, it was cheap. We did an entire POC on this technology stack, ran live deals through these for less than $500 over a 6-week POC. So great progress there too. The last piece I'll mention here is ecosystem thinking. So we, like I'm sure a lot of you have in the room, did some experimentation with blockchain, specifically for our world around counterparty data. So counterparty data, right, counterparties being the other side of any kind of financial contract, and counterparty data being the information about that counterparty. So that could be the name of the institution, the way it's spelled, the way it's abbreviated, the address of that counterparty. So you can imagine as counterparty data flows through our ecosystem, it can get really inconsistent along the way. And where we sit in the world, like we're at the back end. So if that data is inconsistent, we're the ones that have to manually reconcile it every single month. So we went through an effort to evaluate, well, could blockchain, right? That's like a no-brainer for blockchain. If we all had counterparty data on a blockchain together, then we're all managing from the same data set. And frankly, it was pretty successful. The problem is, as you guys know, with blockchain, it's costly. It's not particularly a trusted technology yet, and it requires a lot of players to be on it to make it realistic. And so it wasn't quite for us, but we were able to achieve the same goals with DynamoDB Global Trades, where we were seeing copies of data that didn't require everybody to get on a blockchain, but still allowed us to have data synced across the various regions, the various players, which is ultimately what we were trying to achieve. So those are some of the business things that we've been experimenting with. Of course, next on the docket will be AIML. And there is no better person to help us think through where we could be going with AIML than Felipe, who has such a genuine love of this space. And I'm going to hand it over to him to tell us more about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.
I will make one note before jumping to AIML on the active work. Manoj alluded earlier to working with our service teams. If anyone in the room uses S3 cross-region replication, you can almost thank Manoj almost personally for that and working with some of our teams. So again, active voice and working with our service teams and saying, here's what we need. With the active, we had some really successful conversations earlier this week with some of our service teams, like fault injection simulator, and seeing, okay, here it runs here. How do we actually start testing these in a more active basis and start actually shutting things down, seeing it come up? So actually really excited about the work that Manoj and his team have been leading with, really pushing the envelope on resilience and trying to see how we can make this platform as resilient as possible. So switching to the artificial intelligence and machine learning, and specifically in this new era of generative AI, it is still very early days. As Leah alluded to, it's an area that I've been personally passionate about, and really think there's some just phenomenal things happening in this space with the advent of these large language models, with these foundational models, and we're, I think, just at the cusp of what this technology will be able to do. But some of the things we're working with CSS on actively is really exploring a lot of these. Again, we talked about some of the monitoring and moving to a more active versus preventative monitoring, and leveraging really the ability of these models to reason, to capture some of that and take in some of that and be able to flag. And that actually ties to the next bullet point you'll see there, which is anomaly detection. So we talked about the importance of anomaly detection and making sure finding anomalies in data, for example, and really being able to use, again, the ability of these foundational models to point out when something is divergent and when we need to now flag it for a human review. So that's some of the business aspects that we're seeing. And then, again, some work around forecasting volumes. So some of this will be a combination of what you might traditional or narrow AI, and some of it will also be with foundational models and really trying to leverage that aspect of it. But a lot of these are really also around the theme of productivity and trying to see how we can continue to improve productivity. So obviously, and just to reiterate, those stats are always amazing. So 45 million to 12 million on an annual basis. So that is ongoing savings every single year from that baseline. But trying to see how can you drive that down even further? Where can the business continue to get even more productive? And things, whether it be code generation or really business improvements. And obviously earlier this week, we saw the announcement on Amazon Q and seeing the intelligent business analyst. So really excited about the potential of some of these technologies that continue to help CSS and the broader housing and mortgage space. So with that, we will wrap the session up here. I wanted to thank you all. Actually, if we can help me in the room here, give Manoj and Leah a hand.
Thank you.